Thank you for that warm introduction. Like I mentioned, I'm Alexey. My claim to fame is probably as a growth engineering leader at Opendoor, then running growth engineering at Masterclass. And for the last 2 years, I've been advising companies as they scale up their growth engineering, as well as teaching growth engineering on Reforge. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, before we talk about how to upgrade your stack, we have to understand where we're coming from. So what's the history of growth in MarTech? Then we're going to break our primary talk into 3 sections. We're going to be talking about how tooling has changed, how the process and rituals and the way you've run your team change. And finally, no talk is complete without AI these days. So of course, we'll talk about how AI is being used for growth today. Cool. Let's start with our history. This is Don Draper from Mad Men. I'd love to make this talk interactive, but we're doing webinar, so I'll just answer my own questions. It'll be great. This is Don Draper. This is Mad Men. This is the original sort of Madison Avenue. Madison Avenue in New York for marketing, where the idea is you come up with a big idea in a closed room and you put $1 million in an advertising budget and hopefully it works. It's a beautiful but very qualitative approach. Versus compare that to 2007, where the first modern growth team was started at Facebook in 2007 by Chamath Palihapitiya. At the time, growth had stalled, and they said, what if we staff a team not on a particular feature or concept, but specifically on the metric? And Chamath led that initiative, and say what you will about Meta, but it worked out pretty well for them. So that is where growth came from. It is a much more quantitative approach. I think the next interesting milestone is the launch of Segment. And I'll use Segment as sort of my straw man, but this idea of originally a team working on growth is going to build a lot of stuff and having to do things more or less in-house. You need a lot of engineers to stick things together. And Segment was the first one that said, hey, why don't we try to take a lot of the more rote, sort of like chore style work required to empower a growth engineering team? And so after Segment, you see this crazy rise in MarTech tools, and the map on the right of all the MarTech tools available today is the map from 2020. So today it's even more than that. It is absolutely impossible these days to figure out, to know everything that is available, which is sort of the problem, and sort of why a talk like this is useful. And of course, right, I think like when we talk about the history of growth, I think all good history is personal. So I'll talk about my own experience. Back in 2010, I was an intern at Facebook, and I fell in love with the kind of tooling that they had built that made experimentation so much easier. And then when it was time for me to start my own company in 2014, I contemplated rebuilding this experiment framework and realized, actually, this is quite a lot of work, and I should be focused on something else. But B, actually, the vendors that I can buy are pretty good now across all these tools. And when I ended up joining Opendoor, one of the reasons they were excited to have me was because I was one of the few engineers that had a lot of experience implementing email tools, implementing experimentation tooling. And by that time, the decision was clear. Like a lot of these tools, it made a lot of sense to buy. So that's a little bit about me. I started this journey with a full head of hair, and here we are. So I think it's important to pause and reflect, like, why isn't everybody just using the latest and greatest tools? And I think there's 3 reasons. We kind of got to give ourselves some credit. Number 1, there's way too much stuff. Like nobody can know all about it. 2, like as an industry, we are at most 15 years old. And when it comes time to hire somebody who's done it before, that person was probably at a bigger company. And that bigger company was either using the last generation of tools and it's not worth switching, or they built it themselves. And finally, like nobody writes articles about this. Like nobody in like Forbes 30 under 30 is congratulating you on implementing a better CDP, right? So it's incumbent upon us to spread the word about which tools have become worthwhile. And right, of course, if you look at the pace of growth, right, this crazy metric where ChatGPT within just a few months got to over 1 billion visitors, the pace of growth is better, and the adoption of AI tooling is likewise become gone crazy. And we'll dig into that in particulars. All right. One thing I have learned to do from these talks is to leave a takeaway slide and take a sip. So this is all of our chance to take a break. All right. I hope you enjoyed that brief history lesson. Let's jump in, right? As promised, 3 parts. We'll start with tooling. And here's kind of how we'll be doing it, right? If anyone's seen the wired, tired, retired, I'm going to be doing something like that, but a slightly less impressive format. So for every tool or for every category, I'll talk about what it does. I'll talk about how it started and where we are now and where it might be going. So let's start with experiment frameworks, because these are really fun. First of all, what do they do, right? They're just a fancy if statement. At the end of the day, for the engineers in the audience, I want to try an A/B test. And really, I just want something to figure out and efficiently allocate people between A and B subject to a whole number of constraints. If the user's in A, I want to show them A. If the user's in B, I want to show them B, etc. Originally, I think, again, going back to Facebook, Facebook built, in the day, this really cool tool called Gatekeeper. There's some fun articles about it. And not only could you allocate efficiently, you could define a specific audience. So I only want to show this to people who are on mobile in Australia, right? And only to 10% of them, and et cetera, et cetera. So beautiful tool, super performant, not really available. All the feature flag tools that were available in the wild were not comparable to what Facebook had internally in the early days. And then Obama came along in 2008, and the Obama 08 team was way ahead of its time in terms of the ability to use technology to help digital campaigning. And the folks that built their experiment framework tool actually ended up starting this company called Optimizely, which sold, I think, a couple of years ago. And I would describe Optimizely as the first non-terrible experiment framework available out there. It was very expensive, but a lot of the things that I was missing from Facebook in industry, they finally had. On top of that, they solved 2 other problems. First of all, they had a WYSIWYG product, which meant that for non-technical users who wanted to experiment with landing pages, they could just go in and click on an element and change the text and launch that as an experiment, as Optimizely Web. And finally, they were peak-proof, which meant that a very common way that most teams will screw up an A/B test is they will take a look beforehand, and then if it looks good, they'll stop it early, or if it doesn't look good, they'll give it another week and see if it gets to stat sig. And for a number of reasons, that messes with your false positive rate. Optimizely developed a new algorithm that made it impossible to cheat in this way, and made it impossible to shoot yourself in the foot. So big fan of Optimizely. We brought it in to Opendoor back in the day, but it is not the state of the art, right? These days, so it's really some fun stuff, like great visualizations from Optimizely. But these days, as of 2020, 2021 or so, there's 3 big vendors that everybody's been evaluating as the latest and greatest, and they're mostly alumni of the original team. So Statsig is the original Facebook team trying to build something like what they had. Eppo is the original Airbnb team, taking those best practices and making them available for folks. Growthbug comes from education.com, but honestly, I'm really impressed with what they've built as well. I've seen them in a number of these bake-offs and feature comparisons. What's cool about these? First of all, they no longer cost an arm and a leg, which is kind of nice. Second of all, they're open core. Or actually only one of these, only Growthbook, I believe, is open core, but the rest of them are warehouse native, which means that rather than sending them data, the data can live in your Snowflake or your Redshift or wherever, and they're just sitting on top of it doing that analysis, which is also what allows it to not be so expensive. Second of all, they are the technology, the new algorithm that Optimizely developed, which they called Stats Engine, have been advanced even further with things like Cupid, which is a technology out of Microsoft that lets you get to statsig a little bit faster, and contextual bandits, which are ways to dynamically iterate on your copy as you're going. So lots and lots of, if you are considering evaluating a dedicated experiment framework, I think the state of the art has really shifted, and if I were you, I'd be looking at the 3 of these. Okay. Next, let's talk about lifecycle marketing tools. The hilarious thing about these tools is nobody can quite agree on what the acronym is, and I'm just going to leave it be. This is the tool that lets non-technical folks create this sort of programming interface on the right that says, hey, when a user shows up, wait 2 days, send them this email. If they didn't convert, check this, maybe send them this email, send them this push notification. It's sort of this, you can not only write email templates, but also like the business logic around who should get what when, and iterate on that. The original, I feel like, again, the first big one that I was introduced to was MailChimp. And then Marketo is sort of this older vendor that's been around for a long, long time. Like originally it was just emails, not super powerful. Like, I mean, you just even having the dynamic template was sort of the big win, and restricted to email. This is the state, over 15 years ago. Versus these days, these sort of like mid-market vendors, Braze and Iterable probably have a ton of share across startups, as well as Customer.io for some earlier stage ones. Klaviyo has some share. The cool thing about the majority of these is, first of all, it's multi-channel. So it's no longer just a place for emails. It's also now a place that you're handling push notifications, in-app messaging, WhatsApp, SMS, any number of these things. Like if the user needs to be communicated with, like you could do it all in this tool. Second of all, like I said, not only emails are WYSIWYG, but also you can define your own programming language. Like in fact, the level of power that you have in these workflows, like you can call a webhook to get some data from your own thing. You can iterate stuff. They're effectively Turing complete. And I say that like in 2019, we got an award from Iterable for the most sophisticated use of Workflow Studio, which I think was just a fancy way to say that like really we made it too complicated. Like the open door iterable flow is over 100 nodes deciding exactly what kind of email you should be getting that day. We really pushed it to the limit. And so what typically happens when a company starts to sort of run into the edges of one of these tools is they move in-house. And one potential future are companies like DittoFeed, which is just a year or two old out of YC. It's ex-Braze folks. And the idea here is, hey, again, it's warehouse native and it's open core, which means that if there's some feature that it's missing, or if you need to add something like, hey, I want to run a unit test before this results, actually, like you don't need to abandon the entire system, just fork it and iterate on it. And of course, Iterable and Braze all cost an arm and a leg, versus once you are warehouse native, you are able to, like you can have the data and the charge will simply be for the tool on top. All right. And finally, on the tooling side, I want to talk about customer data platforms. This is one of these terms where everybody says they're a customer data platform, and the definition is very, very broad. I think I will give you the simplest sort of engineering side definition, where it's, I want to get a bunch of data in from a bunch of places, from my website, from Stripe, from any number of places. I want to get it into some central place and then out to all of the places that I need, like my data warehouse, so I can do analysis, like a product analytics tool, like Amplitude, so I can see what users are doing, like marketing tools like Iterable and Braze, so I can trigger emails off of them, like Google and Facebook, so I can advertise effectively. So it's just a funnel that says, here's a bunch of data in, I might need to transform it lately, and it automatically goes out. And as we mentioned, the first one of these, I mean, not the first one, but the first one of these that was really noticed and picked up in a big way by Silicon Valley is Segment. But really, like, I actually think the first customer data platform is Google Tag Manager. And Google Tag Manager does a lot less. It's just a place to put a bunch of advertising pixels on a website without needing to send an engineering PR every time you do that. It's not nearly as powerful. Like Segment lets you do a lot more, but really, like Google Tag Manager is still ubiquitous. Like most of the companies I talk to still have Segment, but then we'll add Google Tag Manager at the end for the long tail pixels. And you're ultimately solving the problem of marketing needs to be able to add and remove pixels and iterate without being bottlenecked on engineering. So respect to Google Tag Manager. I don't feel like that's going away. The trend I've seen happening these days is, again, Segment costs an arm and a leg, and then Amplitude also costs an arm and a leg. And so a company doesn't have budget for two of these. And so which one are you going to get rid of, right? So Amplitude wants you to get rid of Segment, and they'll never admit it. But the way that they do that is they say, hey, here's a CDP. Here is a CDP. Actually, Amplitude has a CDP now. Here's all the destinations. Here's all the sources. It's not going to have 200 of them because they haven't invested quite that much. It's not going to have the full functionality, but it may be close enough that maybe you can get by with just Amplitude. And Mixpanel similarly started adding sources and destinations, like saying, hey, like we have this now. We will handle this for you. So this is this idea that CDPs are becoming commoditized. Like if the thing you care about is just getting data in from a bunch of places and getting data out to a bunch of places, it's starting to get implemented by everybody. There's also PostHog, which is a YC company out of a few years ago, which is, again, like a warehouse native, like open core kind of everything tool. And they also, of course, implement the sources and destinations as you see fit. So the trend here is everybody now is saying they have to have a CDP or like, oh yeah, CDP is part of it. Don't worry. Like we are also a CDP. And the interesting trend is this work that the folks at HighTouch are doing, which they've bought the domain, or like friends don't let friends buy a CDP. And their argument is actually a CDP is overkill. It's doing stuff too much and you'd rather be doing it in pieces, right? So rather than getting stuff in on, rather than having one tool bring stuff in, transfer and bring stuff out, just use whichever of these commoditized tools bring stuff in, get it into Snowflake, and then use a reverse ETL tool like HighTouch or Census to get it out, not in a streaming fashion, but in a bulk fashion, which lets you do some nice correction and works really well on a number of use cases. So at least theoretically, if you believe HighTouch, the future of the space is everybody will be doing things in a modular fashion. Now, having said that, when I work with like Series B, Series C companies that are just starting to get serious about this, honestly, segment is usually a pretty reasonable solution for them. I think it's much nicer to just implement one vendor and one vendor that has the destinations than taking the engineering time to actually implement bundles management and figuring out how everything works together, et cetera. So I think for larger companies, this makes a lot of sense. But if you're just getting started, honestly, I think in a lot of cases, the answer may just be segment. Okay. Let's take a pause there. Everybody doing okay? Feel like a lot of people sharing LinkedIn. Okay. Getting some reactions. Reactions are helpful. Thank you. All right. Cool. Let's talk about processes and rituals. This is for the engineering and PM folks in the audience. Look at all these reactions. Thank you, guys. Yeah, keep if something makes sense, use a reaction. I can't see anybody's camera, so it's super helpful. Okay. Let's talk about processes and rituals. So I think the first thing that I will say is the quality of a growth team executing on ideas is basically did we come up with a good list of ideas, and then did we execute the right ones? And those are the processes I'm mostly interested in. Those are processes I really cared about at Open Door Masterclass. Let's break that into generating ideas and prioritizing them. So how do we generate ideas? Well, it turns out by default, if you do not know how you are generating ideas, then you are in hippo mode, which is just a fancy way to say the highest paid person's opinion, or for a rough proxy, the product manager will just decide where do the ideas come from the product manager, or maybe they came from the CEO who messaged and said you guys should do this. It's not a terrible way to do things. If you if only one person gets to decide what should be done, yeah, probably it's the PM. That's why they have that job. But you can do better, right? I think the two approaches in the last couple of decades are hackathons, right? So Facebook is sort of famous for this. The like button was somebody's hack project. On Slack, reaction emojis were somebody's hackathon project. So running a hackathon is one way to generate ideas that come from engineering that would have otherwise not built it out. The other version of this is doing a brainstorm, and so having some sort of planning process where you describe all of the ideas and you invite the engineers and everybody on the team to just make a big exhaustive list and narrow down later. I like brainstorms. I've run a lot of brainstorms. I teach brainstorms to companies I advise. It's really worth doing. But there are a number of improvements these days in terms of where ideas come from. So number one is the experiment idea review. This is an idea that came out of Pinterest and popularized by Pinterest, since been used by a number of other companies. This is the idea that instead of asking an engineer to generate 10 one-sentence ideas, you ask them to generate one page idea, where they should actually take the time and make the case. And actually, you as a company should invest in teaching engineers how to write a good one-page proposal for why something should be done. And you should insist at some level of seniority that ideas be pitched at some cadence. This is used by, again, Pinterest, Dropbox, Character AI. For people that like it, it seems to be going well. The other idea that is now available is actually like your competitors are probably a pretty good source of ideas. So now there are companies like Do What Works, where you can just tell them, hey, here are the companies I consider to be my peers or my competitors. And they scrape their website, they scrape their app, and every time they have an experiment win, they just tell you, hey, they tried this, they ran this test, and this was the winning variant, which actually that's probably a pretty good idea of what you should run. So, and of course AI, but we'll talk about AI when we get there. That is a Do What Works, Brian. Do what works. All right, so new places for ideas. But I also want to talk about prioritizing those ideas and then estimating what happens next, right? Because if you got a lot of ideas, but then you don't find the best ones, like it's kind of not that valuable that you picked it. So again, the default state is this sort of HIPAA mode. There's this great quote where if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. So the former Netscape CEO. Netscape was a browser company. I feel it became Mozilla. Mozilla was a browser company. I truly, I feel old when I explain this stuff sometimes. But yeah, by default, you do your brainstorm, but the PM still says, yeah, these are the 10 that we're actually going to do. And then the engineer's like, well, why did we do this brainstorm if you were just going to pick them? Like, I kind of, like, this feels really arbitrary. So then you have these improved processes that help you actually, like, you put them all in a spreadsheet and you rank them on, like, okay, like, how likely is it to work? How much work is it? And if it works, how big is it going to be? This sort of like ICE or RICE model. I gave a talk about this before, or I wrote a piece about this before, and I just assumed that this sort of like, always existed. And it's not true. And I want to give credit where credit's due. So ICE, which is a simpler one of these, came out in 2015 by Sean Ellis, who wrote the Growth Hacker book. And then RICE, which added reach, which is like, hey, like, are 100% of people going to see this, or is only a minority of folks going to see this? Came out of Sean McBride, who was at Intercom and wrote about it in 2017. So you get full credit, Sean. Here's a photo of Sean. Thank you for your contribution. Like, it was so popular, I really did not know where it came from. So that's awesome. Okay, and then yeah, these are worth doing. I recommend this to most companies. I think the benefit is like the engineers understand how the sausage is made a little bit, and so when it's not like, why didn't we do my idea? It's like, well, do you think you said your idea would take 3 weeks? Like, these can all get done in 1 week, or like you thought this was like a high confidence idea, but it's actually like we have no reason this would work. Like, can you give any evidence why this idea would be likely to work? I think that's pretty powerful. And then these days, there's lots of additional formulas for this. I mean, I wrote a piece for Lenny called DRICE, which adds the idea that like not only do you prioritize the list, you then go and do a brief exploration for your short list to prioritize that further. Like Darius and I have seen that have a bunch of work. Rody is what Elena Verna teaches, also at Reforge, which restates things to take more account of the fact that the time required is not just the engineering time, it's also the design time, it's also the time to run the experiment. I think it's a pretty useful formula. It's kind of a rite of passage these days. There's just this very long list of acronyms. Basically, if you are a person writing about growth, you at this point have come up with your own experiment framework. So I highly recommend it. It's fun to find an acronym. The craziest one is from Guillaume, who used to run growth at Segment and does advisory work now, where he has engineers bid on projects. And basically the engineer that says they can do it in the lowest time will take that ticket, which is, I'm not suggesting you do that, but it's like, what a fun way to like run a team. I really appreciate the creativity that people have brought to prioritization and estimation. Cool. Time for some water. How's everybody doing? All right. We're about to talk about growth. Kind of inevitable, right? We're not talking about AI. Yeah, here we go. The great LLMification of growth. Okay. So one thing I'll say is there's a lot of hype, but it's not all hype. So in this section, we'll get rid of the format we had, and I will just give you literal use cases of, here is a company, they ran an experiment, it made them money. Like, there are things you can generalize with this. So let's dig into it. So first of all is this concept of an AI ghostwriter. What do I mean by this? Companies often rely on user-generated content. Like users have to write stuff, and users don't like writing. Like they'll do it, but it's a stressful thing, right? And so there's this great use case from change.org, where so change.org is the place that people write petitions, and a petition will succeed if it is well written. And one thing they noticed is actually like GPT is kind of good enough to help with that these days. So when I tried to write a petition earlier this week, it said, "Hey, would you like to start with a generated petition draft?" And I said, my neighborhood should have safer streets. Just gave some topics, gave some categories, why it's important to me, and it generated this. And I can make a couple changes, but other than that, this petition's ready to go. And this was like absolutely huge for them. Like the initiative that made it possible to do AI petitions ultimately moved their core metric on petition success by 50%, which if you work in growth, a 50% win is incredible, especially for a mature company like change.org. Another example of one of these is Nextdoor, which is a neighborhood forum startup. What they'll do is, you'll live in some neighborhood and somebody will write a post to the community saying, "Hey, has anybody seen my car or whatever?" And they will send that out to members of the community, but the email will be whatever subject the user set, which is not always the optimized for opens and clicks. So the idea here is they go from picking just the first few words or picking the subject to asking GPT to actually summarize and come up with a compelling subject that would generate people to actually engage with the content. And there's a good blog post about this that you should find and look at. But effectively, when they published this a year ago, they were able to improve engagement by at least 1%. And having caught up with the team recently, I think at the time they ran into truly this is so much content that they ran into a pricing issue. And now that open models are becoming easier and now the costs are going down, it makes more sense to actually, at this level, start to personalize and actually create these custom subject lines for emails and push notifications of content going out. So really cool article. I'll link it later. Quite interesting. So the shared idea between these two is it's sort of this AI ghostwriter where you have user-generated content, and if that user-generated content was better or if it was easier to write, then your users would be doing more of the thing that leads to your success. And so one of the use cases AI is used for today is just effectively ghostwriting or improving user-generated content. And I've got another example from Nextdoor is SEO. Now, I will there's this great new thing called AI slop, which is just if you thought SEO, just writing low quality content, and that's why you can't Google anything, was bad before, I will assure you, it is going to get worse with AI. And I am not here to tell you, please generate, 1,000 versions of the same page that already exist without humans in the loop. I don't think there's going to be alpha in that ultimately. I think it might be a short-term win, but I wouldn't invest in that long-term. But the insight that the Nextdoor folks had is if you create net new content based on data that only you have, actually the fact that it's AI generated is not a big deal because you're actually creating a useful article for folks. And in the Nextdoor example, they've created neighborhood guides. So every neighborhood, they have a unique insight onto because they know what are people concerned about, what kind of activities are people doing. They can read all of the data in those forums and summarize them in a way that doesn't affect privacy. That is super helpful for somebody if they're looking at a specific neighborhood. They also mentioned that the photo that you see behind you is AI generated, right? So rather than going and trying to find tens of thousands of neighborhood photos, they were able to ask to do that with generative AI. And that statistically did perform better over not having an image. Okay, so use case number 2, this is kind of a mini one, is AI, is SEO, but only for new content, right? Don't just generate another 10,000 articles. That is not that is not helping you. That is not helping the world. Okay, the third use case is personalization. I think we've been pitching in growth and marketing. We've been pitching personalization forever. That's sort of the holy grail, and it's actually easier to do now than ever. So in the Grammarly case, so Grammarly is a company that helps you communicate in English better at this. And they are trying to get people from the free plan to the paid plan. And one of the ways they do that is they send an email saying, hey, maybe you should take a free trial, or maybe you should upgrade. And previously, like when you test those email subjects, that's the lifecycle marketing team. Whenever they have time, they can iterate on that content. But like they also have a lot of emails, and so they're kind of limited. In this idea, they used an AI growth startup and just said, hey, here is a subject line. We will hit you up. We will hit you with an API call every time we have a user, and we will just use whatever subject. And over time, you should just figure out which one of these is optimal. And not only that, we're also going to tell you something about the user. So like, are they, are they a student? Are they a professional? Are they on a personal plan, et cetera? And that allows this AI company to generate and test variants and say, actually, okay, here's what the subject line should be for business users. Here's what the subject line should be for students. That makes this difference. And the other part is like, there's also always fatigue, right? Like any copy that works stops working over time, so it's able to adjust without manual intervention. In this example, I think the subscriptions on that specific email with just the subject, with 53 variants tested, ended up growing by 7%. And if we look at some other cases, and this company, I'll give you their name in just a sec, but some other use cases for a company with Be Real, actually the push notifications were internationalized. And like, even if you have internationalized your copy, you are probably not running A/B tests for the perfect variant in every single language, which is now something that you can do with the benefit of AI. So this is justwords.ai. They are pretty cool. It's really impressive what folks have been able to do it. Okay. The other interesting use case that I have seen is outbound, right? So for folks in B2B, especially on more the enterprise side, a lot of what you end up doing is sending outbound emails, and you try to automate those as best as you can. And so from a recent talk of Guillaume's, who's helping Reddit out right now, AI is very helpful at saying, hey, here's a template email that we'd like to send. Given this customer, given what we know about them, can you please fit this in? So if you are Grammarly, for example, like what subreddits should you be advertising in? Probably like language learners or something. But that is a much easier ask to make of an LLM that you would be out of any kind of machine learning model that you had before. So in this particular case, as you are doing automated outbound, like the power of how much you can customize has gone up. And again, like if you want to talk, there's a whole art about this, like the pipeline of like learning about users, getting all their data, finding their email, sending that email, testing on that email. And there's a whole other world about that. I won't pretend to know it as well. I think Clay seems to be the exciting new kid on the block if you're just looking for one. But reach out for me if you need if you need more recommendations. Okay. Before we jump into one more section, let's take another round for key takeaways, and I will have some more water. Let's see. All right. Everybody ready? Take that as a yes. All right. Let's talk about velocity, right? Because there's this dream with AI that all of a sudden either like engineers will become much faster, or like we actually won't need engineers. And I'll address both of those. So one, there's sort of this coding copilot category. Hey, how can you make engineers faster? So there was Copilot, like GitHub Copilot. Then Cursor is its own editor. That's pretty cool. But actually, people are saying like the latest Claude is probably the better at generating code. But actually, as of last week, like the new OpenAI launch is better at generating code. So I feel really dumb giving you this advice. There's no way that like by the time you're watching this on YouTube, like what I recommended is true anymore. So if you want to know how to become a faster engineer through coding copilots, like Google it, right? It like this changes so quickly. It is valuable. It's particularly valuable when you're generating new code. It's harder to work in big code bases, but engineers always love excuses to make their code more modular because now AI can work on more modular code. All right. Next. So rather than making your engineers faster, maybe what you can do is just like actually have AI run the whole process. And the example team here is actually one of my clients, is CoFrame. So CoFrame is similar to Optimizely Web for folks that have used it before, which is you put it on your website and it can make changes to it, right? You can change copy, it can remove sections, it can regenerate images. But unlike the generation, a decade or two ago, where you would have to go in and like make those changes and you're saving engineering time, here it's also coming up with the ideas, asking for your approval to validate them, and then just iterating on finding the best variants and generating the next set of ideas by itself. So it's able to kind of act as if you had an engineering team and with a designer and product manager focused on your landing pages. Actually, it can just do this for you. And again, you'll see a couple of use cases here where for certain companies it realize like it's not just coming a copy sort of like blindly. It understands the concept of themes and bets and saying, okay, if this is true, what is the like how should we change the copy? So Kingfisher and the growth machine, like focusing on metrics helped with the growth machine, focusing on simplicity helped with Kingfisher, etc. Now, is this as good as a like highly competent like growth engineering pod like focused on landing pages? Absolutely not yet. Is it improving? Yes. And it becomes one of those things where if you could only staff so many engineering resources on growth, like landing pages are becoming closer to like, actually, you don't need to staff this. Actually, like this can kind of run by itself and the head of growth can just check in and approve variants every so once in a while. Okay. Whew. We got through a lot of content. Let's briefly conclude. So this is Alice. Alice Through the Looking Glass, I think. It's the Lewis Carroll book that brings the Red Queen hypothesis, which states, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. And if you want to get somewhere else, you have to go twice as fast. So this is kind of what it feels like working on growth, where I'm doing my thing as fast as I can, and it turns out there's actually like, oh, I should be doing this new thing. So it's kind of inevitable. Like if you want to be effective, just keep an eye for talks like this, keep an eye out for new tools. I don't think we're going away though. Like I think like a lot of engineers have anxiety about their jobs. This is my Gen AI Charlie and the Chocolate Factory picture, where the story is Charlie's dad lost his job at the factory and actually got a job repairing the machines that that replaced Charlie's dad. And I think this is sort of the metaphor, right? Like the role of engineering and growth is going to be less doing one-off things and more maintaining the systems that let the whole factory turn. And so one other way to frame this is like from Jeff Bezos, right? The most important single thing to focus obsessively on is the customer experience. So in this world, like as an engineer, the customer is actually the company, and the customer experience is actually the metric, right? And if you see yourself as somebody who is trying to deliver on what your company actually needs, like by any means necessary, like the new tooling is just a means to an end. If you see somebody as like, if you see yourself as like a beautiful React developer, like maybe that'll be somewhat valuable, but I think like the skills we have will change over time. Like my mother-in-law like it still thinks it's gross that we're not coding in assembly anymore, but it's actually like the value is we're still delivering code, we're still helping move the company metrics, but like we are going up and up and up on levels of abstraction. So long as you're doing that, so long as you're focused on the actual growth that the company needs you to, I think growth and growth engineering will be around for quite some time. All right, I have to do a little bit of plugs. Like I think you may get a sense from this call that what I do is help companies spin up growth engineering teams or get the most value out of their engineering teams, mentor and advise, like sort of my bread and butter. I also teach growth engineering at Reforge. If you have engineering counterparts that you work with that you wish were like understood more about growth and we're not just doing tickets, send them to the course. Next cohort starts at the end of the month. And then all of the links that I mentioned today are available on that bit.ly. If you do not want to do a bit.ly, like I completely get that. I will paste that shortly. All right, let's see if we have time for a bit of Q&A.
We do have quite a few questions, so let's take just a handful. So first question is from Alex. How do you validate hypotheses if you have a limited number of customers? So his example is they've got hundreds of users, so it's very hard to test and learn with stat sig. For example, they have an outbound sales call script that they want to optimize and iterate on, but they have a limited number of at bats to try new things.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's just you earlier. That's fine. Like, don't try to run A/B tests, right? Do things qualitatively, right? Like, sometimes if you're on a sales call and it's like, wow, this is really not working, like, don't just say, did this work, did this not work? Like, where did the person not like it? Like, what's the feedback? Like, before you're ready for quantitative testing, like, you should still be iterating qualitatively, right? Like, this is sort of the founder's job, right? Is figuring out how to actually get there.
Now, another question is, do you have a recommendation for a growth stack for much, much smaller teams? Say 1 to 10, 11 to 50. Do you have any
Like
specific
the
recommendations
company is
here?
1 to 10, or the growth team is a 1 to 10, right? I mean, I'll
The
try to answer
company,
both.
number of
It,
employees.
yeah, I mean, like, don't overcomplicate it. I think like post hog probably makes some sense because they're so affordable and like they have a pretty good like plan at the bottom left, and they kind of do everything. Like everything they do, I wish they did better, but like it's kind of good enough for, similar to like what HubSpot does for B2B. Like I think like post hog is pretty good at covering that stack if you're on the consumer side. Probably I like customer IO like for emails early on. Experimentation, don't bother with, right? Like it's just too soon. Um, yeah, that I should write a post about that. That's a good question.
Manoj wants to know, do you have an opinion on Snowflake versus Databricks for the data lake layer? Is one better than the other?
Nope. I don't have an opinion. I think like the established wisdom is Snowflake has more connections and Databricks is better if you're like focused on machine learning use cases. But like I am not in the weeds on those decisions. I've used both. I'm happy with both.
Now, another question here from Aaron. Is there a target number of experiments that a solid growth team should be running per sprint or release?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, it really depends, like where you are in terms of taking big bets versus like small wins. It also depends, like how long it takes you to get to stat sig on your experiments. I think like as a rough heuristic, if you are doing an experiment per every 2 engineer weeks you have, I think that's like you're in pretty good shape. So if you have 3 engineers and like 12 weeks, right, that's 36 engineering weeks. If you can get 18 experiments done in that time, like that's pretty good. And that's assuming you're doing more small bets and like, you have to do maintenance and on call and all of the other like chores required, like of a growth team.
We just got another tactical question, this time from Bobby. When would you want to implement feature flagging for a software company? Earlier or after a set revenue target?
I mean, yeah, I have a post on this, but like feature flagging is pretty different than experiment platforms. Like feature flagging, you might as well have like on day one. Like there's plenty of libraries that do it. There's plenty of like like free tier plans that you should just get on, like even if something like post hog. When like the question is when should you start using feature flags for experimentation? I think my rough heuristic is like when you have like $5 million in ARR, like it starts to like really make sense. And assuming you have enough actual traffic to get to statsig in some reasonable way. And again, like if you want to look for thresholds for all of that, like just go to alexeymk.com. I've got a bunch of articles on exactly this.
And let's wrap with this last question, which is more about your take on growth marketing at a macro level from Alex. Does growth marketing as a practice or function apply and work outside of, say, the SaaS platform digital product space, or is it really industry specific?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Let's see. Like,
And
hmm,
they were specifically
like
asking if there are any examples of growth marketing or growth marketing teams, say, outside of the big tech brands.
I mean, at the end of the day, like you probably like if you are a company, you probably acquire customers, and some percentage of those customers you acquire digitally, right? Even if you're like a restaurant, like some percentage of people are like using your online reservation tool, right? once like you have enough like digital inbound that hits that like $5 million threshold, like it makes sense to invest in that. Even if like it makes sense to invest in a proper team. Like even before, even at a million or two, it might make sense to hire a single growth marketer that can start to like help you figure out what channels you should be bringing more folks in. But I mean it's both like could British Airways have like a marketing arm? Absolutely, right? Like I think if I was British Airways, like there's people that get most of the way through the conversion flow and then drop off. Like they should probably be doing retargeting, right? Like I'd probably be experimenting on pricing. I'll probably be experimenting on like the different ways that I'm upselling premium economy. And I think they are doing that for what it's worth. Like there's a number of companies that are like specifically like MarTech focused on helping airlines get revenue. Colgate, maybe not. I think Colgate is selling entirely through channels. So maybe truly for them, brand channels is sufficient. If it's really the toothpaste I'm thinking about. JP Morgan, absolutely. Like they have private clients. Those private clients have a high net worth. Like figuring out like what channels to be reaching to get more people to, sign up for JP Morgan accounts. Yeah, like fintech is absolutely doing this. Just to cover some of those.
Great. Those were all the questions that I saw up to this point. So, Alexei, thank you so much.